Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for having me. This is
I,
exciting.
I'm really excited. I'm so excited that we got connected because as I've been doing a little research, there's like so much of your story that I see in myself and in the community. Can you tell us a little bit about that time? Well, let's back up for a second. I kind of want you to introduce yourself and say, like, you have these two awards that you won that were huge before we go into the story, because I think that'll set the story up a little bit more to see how far you've come. What are the two, like in 2020, you got this award, in 2021, you got this award. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah. So in 2020, I was nominated for the Women of Inspiration Customer Experience Award. And oh, it was so exciting to win. That was the first big award that I've ever won. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then in 2021, I was nominated and awarded. The the latest one is the Empowered Woman of the Year, which is so exciting because of where I came from was so disempowered. So to be recognized as Empowered Woman of the Year is amazing. And I'm also the Top Behavioral Change Expert Award winner for IAOTP, International Association of Top Professionals.
I love that. And I think that that's a good like setup. Why I wanted you to say this. That's a good setup because your story didn't start there. Like you just said, there was this disempowered. Could you tell us a little bit about the backstory of like where you came from?
Yeah. So, Jennifer, I've been in personal development, personal and professional development for over 30 years. And initially I was a coach. I was a coach at one of the leading coaching institutions, international institutions. But I had this terrible pattern, Jennifer, of quitting. I wanted my own business. I started three businesses. I quit all three businesses, one after another. Um, I had a real people pleasing pattern. So anytime I ran up against anybody who I thought I had displeased, so anybody who was upset with me or even just demonstrated that they were upset by their facial expression, that was enough to have me turn tail and run, just run. So, and I always blame myself. It was always my idea and all this stuff that was bad. And so by the time I did this for the third time, I went, this isn't the business idea. This isn't my partners. This isn't my sponsors. I was great at enrolling. I could enroll everybody in my ideas, but when push came to shove, that's when I would quit. I had to face the fact that I had a pattern in me that dealt with adversity by quitting. And so once I got that, I started to really question what is going on. And Jennifer, what I started to ask myself was not why am I quitting? What I started to ask myself is what is wrong with the operating instructions that human beings have been given that is leading to a 20 to 25% success rate in the majority of what we do, right? If that, I mean, some of the success rates are even lower than that, like, for example, dieting or quitting drinking and things like that. So I started to really, really question what's going on. And so I went back to university. I wanted to study the human brain, how this brain of ours works. I wanted to study the human equation. And I started to realize, yeah, we are all using the wrong operating instructions. We're missing it. And so when I started to understand brain patterning and how the brain works, and I started teaching that, which I've been teaching for the last 10 years, I mean, people in my classes, they have like an 87% success rate. It's just a remarkable difference when we know how the brain works and how to use it effectively.
That's amazing. And yeah, using your brain effectively. We don't ever, I know personally from me and my journey that I don't use my brain and we don't use the majority of like how it can move us forward. So in your classroom, you're saying that you have the 87% success rate. That's huge. If you're
It's
saying, if
huge.
like, I've been in many classes. I've seen how many people complete and finish those
Yeah.
classes. Can you tell us a little bit about like the strategy and the difference between
Yeah.
I don't know anything brain science, so I like to know
Yeah.
all the.
So what we have to realize is that in the last 20 years, the research into the human brain is exploded, the amount of research that we're now doing inside our own heads. Before that, we were always studying nature. And really, we didn't have the brain scanners to truly look into the brain to see how it's working. So that's why what is happening now is so revolutionary. It's not that your brain hasn't always been working this way, it's just that we didn't know how it was working. And so we were trying to use it incorrectly. But basically, what neuroscience has now determined, they've determined a number of things, and they're all really exciting. The first thing that they started to realize is that when you are about to take an action and you think that you are choosing that action. So I thought that I was choosing to quit, right? What in reality happens is that a part of your unconscious lights up prior to your conscious mind making that decision. So when they look on a brain scanner, they can see the brain scanner is actually aware of that decision that you're about to make before you are. So that tells us something really remarkable. This mind of ours, what we think is in control, is actually along for the ride. It's coming in after the decision that's already been made. So if that's the case, why are we investing so much in trying to choose the right decision, right? Instead, we need to ask, is the decision or is the action that I'm currently taking working? And if it isn't, we need to change the brain pattern that is taking that action and not change the action. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay.
My
So
mind
that
is
was
like,
yeah, exactly. That was the first thing that really got me excited. It's like, oh, I'm not choosing to quit. I have a pattern, pre-existing pattern in my brain that is making that decision on my behalf. Now, all my conscious mind is doing is backing up that decision that has already been made and finding and justifying why I need to quit. Perfect. Knowing that, I could stop blaming myself, right? So the first thing I started to do is I started to say, oh, if anybody ever asked me, Adele, why did you do that? Because my pattern made me do it. Like that was my first response. It was like, yeah, I didn't choose to do that. My pattern chose to do that. And then I could get to work on changing the underlying pattern. So that's the first exciting news out of neuroscience. We're all working on the wrong thing.
I'm like, ooh, there's so much there. The patterns and the, I don't know, my mind is like processing all of this. Like, I'm not actually making the decisions. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. So how do we get these patterns ingrained in our subconscious?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, a human brain is not born with patterns. Other animals are born instinctively, so they know instinctively what to do, right? The human brain is not. It is primarily, I mean, other than a few patterns in there when you're born, primarily you are born a blank slate, which means that our brain is highly influenced by the situations that we're in. So in every situation that a person steps into from birth, right, or is
Yeah.
carried into in some cases, your brain is very quickly piecing together a pattern that it can use in the future for a similar situation. So as soon as the brain has created what it thinks, and it thinks is a very important thing to put in quotes, what it thinks is an effective pattern. As soon as it has formed one of those, it will continue to take that action as every time the person steps into a similar situation. That doesn't always work, as we know, right? Which is why most of us have that 25% success rate, which is why we quit on a lot of things, which is why we procrastinate and avoid. It's because that pattern is misaligned with the situation you're in. So the very first time the brain formed a pattern and took an action, it worked. It worked for that situation. But then the world moved on, and the pattern, because nobody has taught us about brain patterning, the pattern is still aligned with this old situation that the person was in. And it's just that misalignment that makes everything a little wacky, a little out of step, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
all we have to do is remove that old pattern. You got to let that old one go And then the brain does what the brain does. It forms a new pattern, but that new pattern is perfectly aligned with the situation you're in. It's made for now, for this situation. And so the action that that pattern takes is highly effective. Yeah.
So what is the
Questions? Make
oh
sense?
yeah, there's so
Okay.
many questions. I'm like, which question do I start with? One of my questions is, so we recognize that there's a pattern. What is like the first step in starting to shift these patterns? Because it's obviously not something that's well known, because if it was, we'd all be out of these patterns and living this best life of abundance, and our success rate would be a lot higher. Like, where is that first step?
Yeah. So the first step is not to ask, is this right? So I'm gonna mic drop you right here. Okay. So we're always asking, what is the right thing to do? What is the wrong thing to do? Is this correct? Is this incorrect? Okay. When you start playing with patterns, it's like, who cares? The only question that we need to ask ourselves is the action that I'm taking working? Is it leading me in the direction that I want to go in? Right now, the beautiful thing about working with patterns is you don't need to know the solution. And you might have questions about this, Jennifer. So I'm going to say it and then I'm going to wait for you to ask me your questions. If you start asking, what should I do? Think about it. You've got a brain that is already pre-wired with all these patterns. If your solution, the solution that is right for Jennifer, the solution that is right for Adele, and those will be different, right?
Yeah.
If your solution is not already in the brain, how can you possibly take that action? So I might be able to say, Jennifer, here's what you should do. Right? But you don't have a pattern to take that action, so you can't do it. And then you beat yourself up and say, what's wrong with me? Right? Make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Like
So
everything that makes
yeah,
total
yeah.
sense.
So what we need to do first is, first of all, recognize if we had the solution, we would not have the problem. So the solution is currently not in your brain. I did not have a solution for not quitting. Everybody told me commitment, willpower, know the steps, set the goal, visualize, do affirmations. Everybody told me that advice, but it wasn't my solution because it wasn't in my pattern box, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing I had to do was remove the problem. I had to remove the problem of quitting, which was coming from an existing pattern. Once I removed that pattern in my brain, now my brain was able to piece together a solution that worked for me. Okay. And that will be different for every person on the planet. So, what I teach is a method of subtraction, not addition. We have to subtract the pattern. Now, your brain will do, the brain is a brilliant problem solver. Brilliant, right? That's its entire design, is to solve problems. That's all it does all day, every day, right?
Right.
The problem is it keeps interfering with that process because it's running down the same channel over and over again. So when we can just remove the pattern remove the problem by removing the pattern, the brain comes up with a brand new solution, which is perfect for Jennifer, perfect for Adele, perfect for your listener.
I'm like, my brain is like, I'm like firing on all cylinders right now. Like, there's so many questions I have about like these repatterning. And you say that you work with others. Where can people find you if this is resonating with you?
Yeah, so my book, they can order my book. All I ask them to do is pay for shipping. I will pay for the book, and that you can get through Shift 4 Steps. So SHIFT, the number 4 STEPS.com. Free copy of my book there. There's also free training that you can get on that site as well. So if anybody's interested in knowing more about the brain, how the brain works, left brain, right brain solutions, all of that stuff, there's free training, and grab my book.
Awesome. And I'll get that in the show notes. I just wanted to put that in there to make sure that like listeners know, like, if this is resonating with you, stick around. We still have more to come, but I want to make sure people can find you. So I want to talk about, like, you have these patterns. And I know that in my tribe, we've been talking a lot about our money patterns. And I know this is one of the things that you had in when I've been searching and doing my research, that it's a specialty of yours. Like, can you tell us a little bit about our money patterns?
Yeah. So the other thing that's really helpful when we look at money, and money doesn't work for a lot of people. Okay. And there is a reason for that. There is nothing wrong with you. And there's nothing wrong with what you're doing. It doesn't work for a particular reason. And let me try and very briefly explain what happens in the brain when it comes to money. Jennifer, you've probably heard that your brain is divided. We have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. Most people know that. One most people are not aware of is that the latest findings in neuroscience do not divide the hemisphere by what the hemispheres are doing. So in other words, left hemisphere is not responsible for logic alone, right? Left hemisphere is not mathematical. It's not any of that stuff. Both sides of your brain are needed for functional things. The right hemisphere is not by itself creative. Both sides of your brain are needed for creativity. But there is a fundamental difference between these hemispheres, which is really important to know when it comes to money patterns. The left hemisphere's role is to narrowly focus in on the situation at hand. It reduces all the complexity of the moment around it so it can drill down. The right hemisphere's role is to be deeply connected to now. It has a broad, open, sustained awareness that drinks everything in. So how does this affect us when it comes to money? Well, money is a left brain pattern. Money doesn't actually exist in the world. There's no thing in the world called money. And I know people think that money is currency, but I need us to look at it from the perspective of a pattern. There's nothing in nature which is money, right? So money is human created, which makes it a left brain pattern by itself. All right. Now, what people need to know when it comes to money is that the left hemisphere's design is all about utility. The left hemisphere separates and divides, and as it does, it turns everything into a resource, including you and me. I'm going to let you interrupt me and ask questions because we're going deep, deep into the brain here. Okay. So the reason that money corrupts is because the left brain can only see the world as a resource, as a matter of utility. How can I use this thing? The left brain looks at a tree and thinks, how do I use that tree as a resource? The left brain looks at water and will charge for water. The right hemisphere doesn't do that. The right hemisphere is very, very attached to the moment. It's very attached to nature. And it sees everything in terms of context, right? Okay. All right.
Okay.
So here we have this left brain pattern that turns everything into a resource, including you and me. If there is a financial transaction involved, we are calling on the left hemisphere to prioritize this situation. Make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
In doing that, I stop seeing you as a human being and I start to see you more as a resource.
Oh.
Tell me if I've made sense. And if you
Yes.
think about it, if you think about sales conversation, you'll see this happening inside your own brain, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So our right hemisphere is about reciprocity. It's about favors. When we're friends, Jennifer, it's like, what can I do for you? And I don't expect anything in return for that. I just want to do for you, right?
Yeah.
The left hemisphere is transactional. It's like, Jennifer, what are you going to pay me for that? Right? Or what do I get in return? Okay. So knowing that money is a left hemisphere pattern, it makes it really easy to see why there's so much confusion in those sales conversations.
Yeah.
They're making sense, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's not about reciprocity. And yet, if we bring in this idea of favors and friendships and all of this into a sales transaction, it gets messy.
Yes.
It gets really, really, really messy. So, what your listener can do is once you know how this brain of ours is working, you can say, okay, in this conversation right now, we are in a friendship conversation. But if I want to do business with you, I have to physically take you from the friendship lane and let you know that we have entered a market lane transaction. I'm going to let you know, I'm going to physically take you from your right hemisphere to your left hemisphere. Okay.
Okay.
And if your listener is a salesperson and they can remember to do this, it is so helpful. It's like, okay, so I'm starting this sales conversation and we're chit-chatting and we're in this lane of friendship, right? Reciprocity. How are you doing today? How's the kids? That's perfect. Nothing wrong with that. You're in the right brain. Okay.
Right.
Now, physically walk this person over to the left brain. And how you do that is this. Would it be okay if we have a sales conversation now? Would it be okay if we speak business? It will take, and if you think about the left brain, very transactional, so you're going to give them an amount of time. It will take 45 minutes. At the end of that, you will be in one of two places. You're either going to say, great, Adele, thank you. I'm good to go. Or no, thank you, Adele. Or yes, please, Adele, I want to know next steps. Okay. And I'm going to say this to the person I'm talking to. So this is me talking to you, Jennifer, if I'm going to enter you into a sales conversation. At that point, Jennifer, you will be in one of two places. You will say, thank you, I'm good to go. Or you will say, okay, Adele, what are next steps? Either way is okay with me. Just let me know at the end of 45 minutes. Is that all right? Okay. What I've done is I've moved you. I've told you, okay, brain, I'm taking you from right brain over to left brain, and you will be left with a choice. Now, you, the seller, relaxes. You've already set up the transactional rules for this engagement, right? The person relaxes because they know it's going to take this length of time and I'm going to get to choose at the end. So both of you are now totally comfortable. You're in the right lane. All right. Now,
Wow.
at the end, if they say yes, next steps, you're still in the market lane. If they say no, I'm not interested, fine, you're back to the friendship lane. Okay, no problem. You know, hey, we want to meet for coffee next week. I'd love to chit chat and get to know you better, whatever. Like, or just, okay, that's great. Thank you. I'm good to go. Right. And it's just so relaxing. So again, I'm going to let you ask questions. See if you got it.
You see my brain going like, wow, there are so many, I'm just like all these flashbacks to all the sales calls that I've been in from the other side. I've never heard anyone do that, but just even you explaining it was like this new level of comfort. Like, okay, yeah, instead of saying like, let's get on this strategy call, and then the strategy call being a sales call, like
Yes.
actually present it and put yourself in that mode. And it's funny because as you're mentioning things, I'm like, oh, I live in the right brain a lot. I'm in that
Yes.
friend zone. I don't move into
Absolutely.
the other zone very fast, if
That's right.
ever. Like, I'm a friend zoner.
That's right. And people who are in the friend zone, they really struggle to make money, right?
Yeah.
It's a real struggle because they're trying to use the right brain for a market transaction that requires the left brain in order to make it. Because there's no money in the right hemisphere. Right hemisphere thinks,
No.
oh, yeah, of course I'm going to give that to you. Why would I charge you? Like, you know.
All right, here in that brain, let's get some left hemisphere in here. Like, oh, it's so, I'm like, there's so many things. Like, my brain is like trying to process all of this because that is just so cool. But yeah, I definitely live in the friend zone. Is
Right.
one of the big things. And then I see from the sales calls that I've like people have gotten me into, they live in the other zone. They're fully into the marketing zone. But finding that balance
Right.
is where the
So it's
magic
not so much
happens.
a matter of balance, it's a matter of knowing in your head which hemisphere you're in. Okay?
Okay.
So what's really important when we work with patterns is awareness comes first. It's like, "Oh, I'm I'm feeling upset and used as the salesperson. Okay, so let's say that one of your listeners here is a salesperson, they're an entrepreneur, they're selling and they're feeling used. That tells me that they are in the friendship zone, thinking they're in the market zone. Okay, so they haven't structured the call to move hemispheres. All right, so that's
Okay.
the first thing I know when that happens. If you're feeling used, you're in the wrong hemisphere. The reason you're feeling used is because the right hemisphere is all about reciprocity. It's all about favors. It's all about giving, giving, giving. And then that person is probably giving, 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 expecting to be given in return. But the person on the other end of the telephone call or on the other end of the sales call is in the market zone. So they're going, what's in it for me? Right? Get it? Okay.
Yeah.
So now you've got this misalignment, and that's why this person is feeling used and abused and taken advantage of. They are, but not because it's the fault of your client. It's strictly because you're in two different hemispheres.
Wow. I'm like, my brain is just there's so many things. So I want to know, like, what got you into, besides your own story, like how did you get into this learning learning about like how to shift out of these patterns, like, and bringing it to, I mean, if you're the 2021 top behavioral expert, come on. Like there's a huge story behind like your passion behind this. Like, what is the big change that you're wanting to make in the world?
Oh gosh, I honestly, I am here to start a movement. We because we don't know about patterns, because we haven't been taught how to effectively use our brain, we swim in a world of blame and shame. It's always about who's right, who's wrong. And if the finger is pointed at you, then you are made to feel ashamed. If the finger is pointed at somebody else, then we are made to blame. And both of these are not working. And both of these are terribly ineffective. And it creates a lot of conflict. So I am honestly, Jennifer, my entire belief that the reason that I think I'm on this planet today is to start a movement which completely eliminates that need for blame and shame. Because once you play with patterns, it's actually amusing. Like it really is. What we do, the little mistakes that we make, they become so amusing because it's like, oh, there's a little tiny pattern that I got to deal with and take care of. And then you have a tool in your pocket to remove that pattern. There's so much freedom in that. It's like, I mean, people can say things to me and it goes in one ear and out the other. I know it's not personal. I know that they're not even responding to me. They just have a pattern in their brain that is doing whatever that pattern does, and they're just doing the best they can in this world. And and I know that I'm the same way. And so every time I do something that doesn't work, I just have a tool to remove it.
That is so amazing. I'm like, okay, I'm getting your book. Where else can we, other than your book, where else can we get these tools that you're teaching?
Oh, yeah. My thought leadership is on adelespraggon.com. So if you just go to my uh, Adele Spraggon, I have there what I'm calling the Pattern Maker Hub. The Pattern Maker Hub has all of my lessons in it. It's a very low cost membership site. And there are so many lessons in there. There are how to remove patterns that don't work and upgrade them. Um, that's the foundational program. And after that, there are money programs and emotional reaction programs and how to remove past stuff from the past that, traumas and childhood stuff. All of that is in there. Relationships, leadership, creativity, sales. Oh my goodness. Like we can deal with it all through patterns.
Wow. So everything we do is a pattern in
Everything
our
we do
life.
is a pattern. Yeah. Yeah. Every single action a person takes is given by an existing pattern. The only difference is does it work or doesn't it work? If it does work, we leave it alone. If it doesn't work, we upgrade it and create an optimal pattern for the moment.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I need all the pattern upgrades. I need to get out of the friend zone. It's time. It's time to get out of the friend zone. So I want to leave with one of my, well, they're all my favorite questions because I just love questions. But if somebody walked away with just that one like boom, mic drop moment, what would you want them to know?
What I want them to know, there's nothing to fix. There is just patterns. All you have to do is align those patterns and you're brilliant. Here's what I really need every listener to know. Everything that you have ever seen, smelt, tasted, touched, heard about, read, looked at in the street, seen on TV, I don't care where you picked it up, it is stored in the unconscious regions of our brain. Our brain is remarkable. How do we know that? Jennifer, I'm sure you've done this. You've smelt something and you've been transported back to a memory in time where you go, oh, I remember every single thing about that situation. Right? Okay. So it's all in here. It's not in a format that we can open a drawer and say, what was I doing on this day? But it's in there. When we remove a pattern that doesn't work, your unconscious is going to dip into that vast warehouse to create your optimal solution. So you don't need to follow anybody else's solution. It's in there. You just need to remove what doesn't work and know that your brilliant, brilliant brain has your perfect solution for you in there. And you will be taking action so differently. It's without blame, it's without shame, it's without stress, it's without anxiety. It is just, I know exactly what I need to do for now. And that is beautiful.
Wow. And that all comes from being able to remove
Yes.
the patterns to create space for the new patterns.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
And it's all inside.
It's all in that person. I mean, the solutions are remarkable. Like I have watched marriages go from being on the verge of divorce, crumbling, to being like newlyweds again within 6 weeks, just simply by removing old patterns. Every conflict on this planet is just a misalignment. And if that person just knows that and knows, oh, okay, yeah, I don't have to have the solution. All I have to do is remove the problem by removing the pattern. Let your brain do what it does brilliantly. 99% of the conflict on this planet would disappear.
Wow. And that's what we need right now.
Yeah.
I'm all for behind your movement. Let me shove the tsunami behind your movement.
Love it. You are so welcome.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for taking this time. I will make sure to get all your information in the show notes and all over all the different platforms that I will be sharing this episode with.
Love it. Thank you, Jennifer. And I appreciate what you do too. Keep spreading the word.